My name is Vadim Krasnolki. This is Media Center Ukraine. Greetings to all the journalists who have joined us here today to propagate information about the most important developments in Ukraine. Usually, these days, we are talking about the war and everything associated with the war, but today we have a much more pleasant topic, which is Eurovision 2022 and the participation of the Ukrainian band Kalush Orchestra in this competition. We have a number of guests here today, and I want to give the floor to Mykola Chernotytskiy, chairman of the board of the public broadcasting company of Ukraine, Suspilne. So my first question is to you. To the best of my knowledge, there have been a lot of difficulties with making this performance happen. So can you provide us with more details? Greetings, everyone. I'm really sorry that we were a little bit late. Nonetheless, I'm very delighted to see everyone. With regard to the Eurovision 2022, as the public broadcasting company, we provide for the participation of a Ukrainian representative within this contest on an annual basis. But after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were a lot of question marks about whether it was reasonable for Ukraine to be represented. There were some issues with resources as well. But we believe that it's of utmost importance for Ukraine to be represented at Eurovision 2022. The band that will be representing Ukraine this year pursues a very important mission of promoting Ukrainian culture, including abroad. Therefore, we recruited some resources from both domestic and international donors, and therefore the Kalush Orchestra Band will be able to participate at Eurovision 2022. We've received support from the Ministry of Information Policy and Culture. There are some restrictions on border crossing, so we had to make sure that the band will be able to go abroad. I'm very grateful to the representatives of the Kalush Orchestra Band for the fantastic promo tours that they had in Israel, the Netherlands, Spain, and Poland. They raised funds for the recovery and restoration of Ukraine. That was the right thing to do, and we provided them with unwavering support. I'm also grateful to the contractor and the company helping the band with the performance itself. We are doing everything utmost to translate this performance into reality. I really hope that the band will win and we will have our third victory at Eurovision. Mykola, how is the Eurovision 2022 going to be broadcast in Ukraine? Because we have the United News Marathon at all TV channels. We will use some other public broadcaster channels like UA Kultura and our digital platforms. We are also having some in-house discussions with our media groups. So the semifinals and the final will be broadcast at the UA Kultura channel. Maybe some of the pieces will be broadcast as part of the United News Marathon as well. What about the participation of Russia at Eurovision 2022? On the 23rd of February, even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we appealed to the European Broadcasting Union, and we believe that Russia should not be entitled to participate at Eurovision. They agreed with us, and the European Broadcasting Union rejected the application of Russia. So Russia will not be participating this year. And to the best of my knowledge, the representatives of Russia might even be excluded from the European Broadcasting Union. Any questions to Mykola from the audience? If there are no questions, then thank you very much. Mykola Chernotytskiy, chairman of the board of the public broadcasting company of Ukraine, Suspilne. And now I want to invite up here the representatives of the Kalush Orchestra Band. They are our stars that everyone has been waiting for. So the Kalush Orchestra Band. Hello, everyone. My first question is as follows. How did you manage to gather physically under the conditions? How did you manage to rehearse? It was not that easy to get together. For a long time, we had to rehearse online because we were scattered to different cities of Ukraine. And only recently did we succeed in gathering together and rehearsing in this turbo mode. But thanks to our hard work, we are sure that we will be able to excel in our performance, even with these restrictions in place. What about the promo tours? Recently, we had a tour of Europe. We visited several European countries as part of Eurovision, but we also had a tour in support of Ukraine. We did not use any special effects. We projected a QR code on a big screen to raise some funds for the Comeback Alive Foundation and some other charitable foundations. Which countries and how many concerts? Israel, Spain, the Netherlands, and Poland. Were more Ukrainians among the audience, or there was also an avid interest from the foreigners? I would say that there were more foreigners because this tour took place as part of Eurovision. A lot of foreigners really wanted to check out not only us, but all the other participants of Eurovision. I think there were maybe only about 15% of Ukrainians. So you felt unrelenting support from the foreign audience because you represented Ukraine. Exactly, there was an avid interest from many countries. This is true. I have another question, if I may. I'm sure that you have received positive feedback on you going to Eurovision, but most likely there's been some criticisms as well. So what are the opinions that you hear around? Well, there's no negative feedback, and even if it is there, it's not prevalent. Even those people who have not been following the Kalush Orchestra band, or those people who don't care about Eurovision 2022, they care about Ukraine being represented within the contest. And we feel this enormous responsibility on our shoulders, so we will do our best to make sure that we are properly represented. I personally believe that it's an important event indeed, that we should not skip it. So thank you very much for having agreed to assume this huge responsibility under such dire circumstances. Can you provide us with more details about the preparations for the contest? What should we expect of you in Turin? We are preparing no matter where we are, even in a hotel room. We occupy the hallway and we rehearse. What can you expect of us? A completely different set of costumes, a completely different performance, but the same song that everyone knows very well. So stay tuned. You know what to do on the 10th of May, Kalush and Ukraine. We will definitely be following you and we will be cheering for you. Any questions from the audience? I have the following question. All the Ukrainians, including performers, joined forces to support Ukraine, to support the charitable foundation, to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Do you feel responsibility for representing Ukraine at such a contest as Eurovision? As I have already mentioned, definitely. We do feel this enormous responsibility, but considering the fact that there's a war raging in our country, this responsibility is multifold. We can definitely feel it, and as I have already mentioned, we will bend over backwards to represent our country with dignity. Any other questions? I have the following question. You mentioned the costumes, that they will be different. Which costumes will you have? The blue and the yellow are the most popular colors right now. So will you use these colors or maybe embroidery? Will you have this pink cap that you're having on? And will your mom be with you? Because she's basically the main character in the song. Well, the hat will definitely stay. We will also use some blue and yellow colors, but in moderation. I think that the costumes will be different by 50%, and then just stay tuned. Well, as for my mom, I didn't know that she would be there during the national selection competition. According to official information, she's not going, but I never know what to expect of her. Any other questions? Then I will ask another question. Eurovision is positioned as a apolitical competition, even though we do understand that it's a powerful media platform and there's always room for politics there. And in case of Ukraine this year, war is a political topic, and this is something that the entire world is concerned about. Do you have any understanding of how you're going to resolve this dilemma, how you're going to communicate the Ukrainian message without violating the rules of Eurovision? You are right, this contest is apolitical, but a lot depends on what we'll be doing on stage. Of course, there are many things that we cannot do or even put on stage because we will be disqualified. But there's a large-scale promo before Eurovision, and a lot of journalists come and ask questions, and we answer. So this way, we can be beneficial. So it's only 3 minutes on stage, but 1 month of preparation before Eurovision. And you can always leverage this 1 month of preparation to support Ukraine and to communicate the message of Ukraine. Thank you very much. I was informed that if you were in the right mood, you would say something. Do you want us to do it? I think everyone is looking forward to it.
Лёле, 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 ей! Стефанія, мамо, мамо, Стефанія, розквітає поле, а вона сивіє. Заспівай мені, мамо, колискову, хочу ще почути твоє рідне слово. Дякую.
Thank you. In my opinion, your Ukrainian message is part and parcel of the song itself, of the melody, and the mood of the song is in line with the current developments. So thank you very much for doing it. Thank you very much for being here today with us at the Media Center Ukraine. We had the Kalush Orchestra band with us. We have a number of other speakers. I'm not really sure whether they are ready to speak. We have Oksana Skybinska, head of the Ukrainian delegation at Eurovision, and Oleksiy Zhembrovskiy, director of France production. Greetings. You're Ms. Skybinska, right? And what about Oleksiy Zhembrovskiy? Is he here? Please join Oksana. My first question is to you. Hello, because to the best of my understanding, you're responsible for the visuals. What will you surprise us with? And is there any information that you can disclose at this point? Thank you for the question. First and foremost, it's important for the director not only to visualize the song, but to transmit the energy. So our forte is the energy of the band and the force of our native soil, and all the visuals will focus on that. Of course, the performers themselves will be at the forefront of attention, while the visuals will paint the ornament of the Ukrainian soul, if I can put it this way. I asked this question to the musicians, and I want to ask you as well. Of course, the visuals are important to communicate the message. So how are you going to resolve this dilemma with Eurovision being outside of politics? And there's a lot of politics in Ukraine right now. Well, first of all, while designing this number, we faced this issue, and in dialogue with the organizers, we had to change the performance several times. So this dilemma has already been resolved, and believe me, from a visual perspective, it will look legit. Oksana, you are the head of the European delegation at Eurovision. What are some of the challenges that you expect in terms of organization? We're going to have 2 very busy weeks ahead of us. We are heading towards Turin already today, and we will have a packed official program ahead of us. This official program incorporates certain events that each and every delegation has to participate in, a large number of rehearsals. The first rehearsal will take place on the 30th of April. It will be the first time that we will see the stage, we will feel the stage, we will communicate with the press. This will be our first conference, and then another rehearsal and an open press conference. So we do understand that the next 2 weeks will be about enormous work on stage, outside of stage. We have already scheduled a multitude of interviews, these 2 separate press conferences, then the semifinal, the final on the 14th of May. This is enormous work. I mean, both rehearsals on stage, then the performances themselves, communication with the mass media. We are in communication with other countries to participate in as many events as possible. We are scheduled some other activities ourselves. As you can see, multiple plans indeed. But during press conferences, are your arms untied in terms of speaking about Ukraine? We always answer the questions that we receive from the press. We still have to be guided by the rules and regulations of the contest. We honor the apolitical nature of the contest, but it doesn't really mean that we can talk about ourselves, that we cannot share what is hurting us. The band can also transmit some of their personal stories. We are living in a very peculiar reality right now, and this is something that we can partially share as well. I believe that there will be an avid interest in Ukraine on the part of the international mass media, and this topic is of concern for everyone. So I'm pretty much sure that everyone will ask you questions about the war and the situation of Ukraine. So I believe that the media component is indispensable in spreading the message about Ukraine. Definitely, there's already a lot of attention from the press. The preparation started a month ago as part of the promo tour. We have been conversing with the press on a frequent basis, and we will continue doing so in Turin. Any other questions from the audience? Can we have the mic, please? Participation in Eurovision implies great resources. In the previous years, the participants had to raise their own funds. What about this year? The band does not have any income, so which money will be used to ensure Kalush's participation? The public broadcaster will cover all the expenses. We also enlisted some financial support from our international partners, so the band will be able to participate in the contest without having to incurring any costs. Do we know how much Ukraine will have to invest into this participation and performance? Well, we cannot really put our finger on any specific amount because the preparation started last year and then this 1 month before the Eurovision competition. So I cannot really mention any specific figures, but we are working on that. We had Oksana Skybinska with us, head of the Ukrainian delegation at Eurovision, and Oleksiy Zhembrovskiy, director of France production. And we also had the Kalush Orchestra band. Thank you, everyone.
Я Вадим Красноокий.
My name is Vadim Krasnookий. This is Media Center Ukraine. Greetings to all the journalists who joined us here today to propagate the truth about the most important developments in Ukraine. The Russians are carrying out constant attacks on the positions of the Ukrainian troops in the Donetsk region. They are destroying civilian infrastructure and massively killing civilians. We have live with us Mr. Pavlo Korotlenko, the head of the Donetsk Oblast Military Administration. Pavlo, greetings. Greetings. Can you tell us more about the last night? How it's been for you? The night was not peaceful because the enemy continues attempting to advance from the north of the region, where our region borders on Kharkiv region, and the Russian army is doing its utmost to advance towards the towns of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk to fulfill their strategic goals and objectives in the Donetsk region. But they are failing. The adversary is sustaining enormous losses, both in terms of personnel and armored vehicles. The Ukrainian defenders, in particular the Joint Forces Operation Forces that are responsible for the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, are maintaining a staunch resistance, so the enemy cannot really advance any further. The town of Liman is under control of the Ukrainian troops, but the Russians continue resorting to their cynical tactics. They just inflict multiple airstrikes on our territory to level towns and villages. This way, they don't want our Ukrainian troops to be able to maintain their positions. But still, as I have already mentioned, we are resisting. As for the front line, this is the line of contact that existed before the 24th of February and before this full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. This line of contact existed, but as I have already mentioned, there are airstrikes, shellings, and missile strikes on almost all villages and towns along the line of contact, along the front line, from the north to the south of the region. We have Volnovaysk district and the town of Volnovaha. By 85%, the town of Volnovaha has been decimated. About 50% of the buildings will not be able to be rebuilt. The same is true about some other communities along the line of contact. There is perpetual shellings and airstrikes on Maryanka, Krasnogorivka, Avdiivka. And some towns and communities more to the south of the region. We also have such large cities as Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Pokrovsk. On a daily basis, these cities are subjected to airstrikes and missile strikes. We don't have a single settlement in our region that would not be affected by airstrikes or artillery shellings. Can you provide us with your overall assessment? So what does this fight for the Donbas look like? Whether the enemy is succeeding in fulfilling its goals and objectives or not? All tactical and strategic plans of the enemy have slightly changed because the Russian troops regrouped and they refocused on the east of Ukraine. But this is something that has been happening for 2 straight weeks now. but the enemy has not been able to deliver on its tactical and strategic objectives because their main focus was on Izum direction, but there the adversary experienced enormous losses. And we can see that in some areas the enemy even had to change their tactics or change their hostilities. So they continue regrouping, they continue distributing their forces to the right and left flanks. The professionalism and the unprecedented valiance of the Ukrainian armed forces are adjusting the enemy's plans on a daily basis. This one is clear, but what about the civilians? How many people were able to get evacuated? How many people are still there? Even before the Russian aggression on the 24th of February, we know that back in 2014, the Donetsk region was densely populated. All in all, there were upwards of 4.5 million people. But that was the situation before 2014. About 2/3 of the region were under control of the Ukrainian armed forces, and a little bit over 1/3 of the region was under control of the illegal militant formations, so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. They controlled about 1/3 of the region, and it's difficult for me to mention the exact population there because there were Russian armed forces and militants based there. As for government-controlled areas, we had 1,670,000 people who lived on the territory of the region on a permanent basis. There were some IDPs who lived outside of the region. So if we include those IDPs, that number would be about 2 million, but that was the situation before the 24th of February. We are in charge of all operational measures, and so we can see that there's a downward trend in terms of the number of population. As of today, in the government-controlled areas, we have about 370,000. Well, it's a very ballpark figure because a more accurate number would require a census. But once again, let me repeat that we still have about 370,000 people in government-controlled areas. But that does not include the town of Mariupol. So this number does not include the people who stayed in the town of Mariupol. So this is the estimated number of people. If we compare large cities like the regional center and smaller towns and communities, the situation varies. In the town of Kramatorsk, before the 24th of February, there were about 189,000 people. And now in the town of Kramatorsk, we have 35,000 people left. So these are those people who did not leave. And the main reason is unwillingness to leave. Some people are very laid back. They are really hopeful that they will not be affected, that their city will not be affected. But we continue communicate the importance of evacuation to all the people. We really hope that in the near future, even more people will leave, because then we will be able to ensure better coordination between the armed forces of Ukraine, the Oblast military administration, and our entire focus will be on defenses in the region. we need to concentrate our efforts on protecting the front line. We do understand that there are some cynical practices on the part of the enemy, and as soon as they understand that they cannot capture a town and they cannot break through the defenses of the Ukrainian defenses, they start just decimating this town via airstrikes, missile strikes, and artillery shellings. What is the current state of play with the green corridors? Is it true that the Russians are continuously violating the agreed green corridors? This is definitely true. We call these corridors green, but I believe that we need to have them in inverted commas. There were multiple agreements reached with the Russians with regard to these so-called green corridors, but these agreements exist only on paper. Unfortunately, the Russians have not adhered to these agreements a single time. Even though, once again, we received the green light from them, we had their endorsement, so it's yet another testimony to the fact that it's not possible to reach any agreements with the Russians. It's even dangerous to have any agreements with them. We keep hearing about the forced deportation of Ukrainians to the territory of Russia. Can you tell us more about it? This is true. And this is something that we can see. We can particularly see it in action in the town of Mariupol. The population of Mariupol does not support the Russians, and the same is true about all Ukrainians, whether in Donetsk region or in other parts of Ukraine. So there's no loyalty to the Russian Federation or to the illegal militant formations of the Donetsk People's Republic. And so the Russians are using some tricks. They are forcibly deporting Ukrainians from the occupied territories to so-called filtration camps. There's one camp in the vicinity of Mariupol. There are some settlements there along the coastline of the Sea of Azov. So they are taking people there to filtration camps. Then they split them into men and women separately. They also sort men by age categories. They take away Ukrainian ID documents from our citizens, and they hand over some sort of their own certificates or documents. And this is followed by the forced deportation to either the Donetsk People's Republic or to the territory of the Russian Federation. Over 30,000 people from Mariupol have been forcibly deported to the Russian Federation. Point taken. There are some questions from the audience, right?
For share the information for international media journalists here, and also my question is we are in the international journalist circle. We saw some video play out, a lot of talking about the steel plant underground civilians. There's a lot of children, and do you have any communication with them do you have any communication with them, or do you know how many children underground still waiting for the vacation? Thank you very much.
At the beginning of my detailed statement, I mentioned that we separate our evacuation activities depending on where they are implemented. So the town of Mariupol is a separate topic. We will continue doing everything possible to evacuate people from the town of Mariupol and to transport them to safety. So while talking about evacuation activities, we can be talking about Mariupol separately and then the remaining government-controlled territory of Donetsk region. There are multiple challenges, difficulties, and setbacks in place because you know that critical infrastructure, roads and railroad are under attack, but we still have coordinated evacuation efforts. Evacuation is still possible and it's being carried out under the guidance of the armed forces of Ukraine and under our Oblast military administration. If your question is about the town of Mariupol and how many children are still there, it's very difficult to put our finger on that. So the only thing we know is how many people get evacuated every day. We have some numbers since the outbreak of the war. And then we also know how many people lived in the town of Mariupol before the invasion. Then we also try to sort these data out based on age and some other categories. So, but once again, let me reiterate that it's very challenging to tell you how many children are still in the town of Mariupol. Over 270,000 people from the government-controlled areas have been evacuated by railroad, and about 80,000 people have been evacuated by vehicles, either private vehicles or buses that were organized by us. So now all these people are in other relatively safe or safe regions of Ukraine. But in terms of children, I don't really have any accurate information right now. We will be able to provide that information once the evacuation is over and all these people are in safety. There is another question on Mariupol. There is an appeal from the defenders there that there's a dire need for evacuating the wounded. Do you think it's possible to reach that agreement with the enemy? We've made such attempts, and these attempts have been multiple. But last week, for example, there was a similar agreement reached that the enemy would allow the evacuation of children and their parents, at least mothers, because there are even some little babies that are still sheltering on the premises of the Azovstal steel plant. And this evacuation was confirmed by the Russians. But as it turned out, they wanted to take advantage of this evacuation and inflict another storming of this metallurgic plant. Or sometimes they use such evacuation activities to capture the Mariupol defenders. And as you know, the Mariupol defenders are the heroic fighters of the Azov regiment. In terms of the wounded defenders, the Russians do not want to agree to any evacuation, so we will not be able to evacuate the wounded fighters. Pavla, thank you very much. There's another question. Good afternoon, Mr. Kirilenko. I have the following question. What is the situation with the food provision in government-controlled areas? Are there any issues with a shortage of food products? Thank you for this question. It's a very pertinent one. Whenever I answer questions, I try to be as honest as possible. I don't want to brag, but I will definitely provide you with reliable information. In the town of Mariupol, since the 1st of March, when the town was encircled and blocked off, we've had a humanitarian disaster there because the Russian Federation does not want to meet us halfway, and even when some green corridors were established, unfortunately, we were not able to deliver any humanitarian cargoes to Mariupol. The current situation in Mariupol is dire indeed. There were some attempts by the government of Ukraine. They are in constant communication with the Mariupol defenders. So there have been some attempts with regard to food delivery and evacuation of the wounded, but these attempts are very dangerous. As for other government-controlled areas, the situation is under our control. In our region, there's a nationwide program on the delivery of humanitarian aid. We have food packages delivered to each and every resident of our region, and we distribute humanitarian aid to different categories of population. We have special humanitarian hubs operating to this end. We also have some stock of humanitarian aid that has been distributed throughout the region, and the regional military administration is in charge of this process. The local authorities are responsible for distributing humanitarian aid to their people, and the same is true about mayors. The transportation and delivery of food products are operating despite challenges, despite daily shellings and airstrikes on our communities and settlements. The humanitarian routes are working. The logistics is working like clockwork as well. We don't really have any urgent problems. We try to be proactive in this regard. We try to make sure that we have some strategic stock in case the situation deteriorates even further, and in case the enemy continues its advance towards larger settlements. I do understand that some categories of population might complain about the insufficient humanitarian aid. Maybe they have some complaints about the amount of food in these packages. But once again, we have a clear-cut algorithm in place, and we have a clear procedure for who is going to receive humanitarian aid. But that said, I want to repeat once again that we need to have some strategic stock in place. I cannot really disclose any details because this information is confidential and it is available only to a limited number of people responsible for this or that settlement. But we are doing everything possible to prevent a humanitarian disaster or even a humanitarian crisis that can grow into a humanitarian catastrophe. But the main message from the regional authorities is as follows. People need to leave the territory of the region. First and foremost, it's important for people, but it will also facilitate the operations of some utility companies that we have on the territory of the region. All the regional leaders continue staying on the territory of the region. We continue fulfilling our job duties. The same is true about heads of district administrations, mayors. We continue working with concerted efforts under martial law. Thank you. Pavlo, there's another question from the journalist. Do you still have some time? Sure, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question about, on the basis of food. Do you think there's a real danger of, is the Russian Federation's aim to starve civilian populations? And also the secondary to that is that my newspaper, the Daily Mail, we have backed a project to send 500,000 food boxes, which are going to the Donetsk Oblast, and just would welcome your thoughts on that campaign that we are funding as a charitable aim.
I will start with your first question. Yes, it's one of the tactical and shameful aims pursued by the Russian Federation. And the enemy is utilizing all sorts of mechanisms to this end. Because they want to envelop cities and villages in our region. They want to capture them. And the enemy, inter alia, employs diverse tactics, including full destruction of settlements via airstrikes, missile strikes, artillery shellings, the blockade of humanitarian routes, so that the population will not be able to receive essentials, including food products. It's one of the elements of their shameful tactics, as I have already mentioned. They want to sow panic among the population. And I want to veer back to some of my previous comments. The most effective way to shatter the enemy plans is to do the following. The territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions are the responsibility of the joint operations forces, and the best way to foil the enemy's plan is to evacuate the local population, because then the armed forces of Ukraine will be able to focus exclusively on the defenses of the two regions. That said, I want to note that we are fully prepped. We have sufficient food stock, so we will be able to maintain our defenses and provide the local population with all essentials, even under such dire circumstances. With regard to the food boxes that you referenced, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all international volunteer and charitable organizations for their unwavering support. We are ready to support each and every initiative of this kind. We are very grateful to food products, medications. We also receive support in the form of sources of power like generators. These items are of utmost importance for us because thanks to this support, we can continue maintaining our defenses. So once again, my sincere gratitude to our international partners, our international friends who have lent a helping hand to us in these challenging times. I will always posit that we will fight until our last breath. We are not planning to occupy the territory of other countries, but we will definitely protect each and every inch of our soil. As for the Russian Federation, we have only one thing in common: the border between Ukraine and Russia. there's no other commonality between us and these non-humans. I cannot even call them humans. I'm really sorry for being harsh. But I've been here in the Donetsk region all this time, and I've been able to see firsthand all the atrocities committed by the Russians. People, humans, are not capable of such things, but we will withstand, we will endure. We are equipped with food products and medications. And of course, it helps us be more effective, act faster, and hopefully we will be able to find a resolution to this war, and this resolution will be our victory.
Окей. Пане Павле,
Mr. Kirilenko, thank you very much indeed for having found the time to talk to us, and thank you very much for having provided us with important information and for everything that you do to help Ukraine survive this trial and tribulation. Vadim Krasnoky, Media Center, Ukraine, our next brief.